interestingly enough, you are the first people that I've interviewed for 2021, and you are also the first people that I have interviewed as a group. Normally, when you see the Expanding Our Roots interview series, oftentimes you'll see that I interview one person at a time. So right now I'm doing two people, which is double the fun, right? You know, multiple stories, multiple perspectives, and it's not going to be, you know, dull at any moment because two different energies, positive energy is going to be really, really great.
Yes, so, yes. 2021 is about doing something different.
I agree. I agree. Now, the first question I wanted to ask you all is relevant to, you know, how you all have been making it through this new year and also through month, I think, 10 of the global pandemic. How have you all been managing that?
Well, when we started out last year, you know, we immediately came together and made decisions about closing our offices because the Foundation for Louisiana has two offices, one in Baton Rouge and one in New Orleans. And so we have the luxury and privilege of being able to work from home. So that is a good thing that our leadership said, no, you all can work from home. And so we've been working from home since February of last year and been able to get the kind of support that we need in order to do that. Not many employers may be able to provide that, but certainly hats off to our senior leadership for providing us with resources and things that we need to make that transition to at home. It is challenging to balance your work life and your home life in your home. So, you know, and so we are really trying to incorporate also self-care in that is very critical.
Co-sign on that, and especially the support that we've seen from, you know, the foundation of really thinking about taking care of self, taking care of family, just making sure that you have time and space for your own like headspace and joy, and just not, you know, relinquishing that, you know, that we all, although we're doing this hard work, deserve joy. We all deserve to be cared for. We all deserve to rest. And so that is, you know, one of the things that, you know, we've been talking about internally, you know, on the job. Personally, you know, I just have to say that, you know, the last 10 months of the pandemic has not affected me as much as other folks. And I do have to give thanks for that. You know, family has been affected. No one's, you know, job was lost, you know, for the most part. You know, folks in my family have been able to transition into a home life. So, you know, just really makes you think about, you know, the privileges that you do have, you know, and how moving forward, you can use that privilege.
Yeah, it definitely is a privilege to work from home, especially during the pandemic, because a lot of jobs that people have aren't translatable to working from home. I mean, you can't work or, you know, be a first responder working from home, and you can't do service working like a hotel or a restaurant service working from home. And when you're out in the public, you're putting yourself at risk for a lot in terms of health and just COVID-19. And it's hard, it's rough, it's a tough season for so many people. But I wanted to ask that question, recognizing that this is a pandemic. This interview series started right in the middle of a pandemic, when the pandemic was first kind of something we were getting used to. And now we're still doing this interview series in the midst of the pandemic, when we're almost approaching a year of quarantines, lockdowns, social distancing, and all these different things. But I wanted to change gears a little bit, because we are talking about home, and I don't think that we can talk about the journey of our work without going back to our roots. And I want to ask you all very simply to just tell me where you all are from and talk about maybe your upbringing growing up where you all grew up. And if you grew up in multiple places, just the growing up in the places that you've grown up in and you've called home.
I grew up in Old South Baton Rouge, a very historical part of the city. Right around the corner, I say, from McKinley Senior High School. That is the major African-American high school that was built. I also attended McKinley Senior High School, McKinley Junior High School, now a magnet school. I also decided that I wanted a more diverse experience. So I decided to attend Louisiana State University. I got exactly what I asked for in that diverse experience, plus encountering racism at that time that I attended LSU. And then I ventured on to Washington, D.C. after college and stayed there for most of my adult life until I came back to Baton Rouge in 2008. But before I left the DC area, I also decided that I wanted to, it's never too late to go back to school. So I went back to school and received a master in management from the Heller School of Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. So I've had quite a journey of just going different places and experiencing other cultures, especially in the DC area, or whether I lived in Georgia and experiencing racism firsthand when you can walk around the corner and there are crosses burning on a lawn there. I've seen that myself. So I've had quite a journey to come back to Louisiana after all these years, and you still see that we still have a long way to go.
Very different upbringing. I'm a military brat, where we've lived North Carolina, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Northern Virginia, Philadelphia. But my dad, after he retired, we settled in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and that's where I spent middle school, high school. Predominantly, Virginia Beach is a predominantly military town. Air Force and Marine Corps all over the place, Navy everywhere. Went to, it was called Ocean Lakes High School. Very mixed, mixed students, mixed race school. I would say, I guess, largely, middle class mixed school. I went to Virginia Tech, which is predominantly white institution. And then from there, went on to working in the private sector and the corporate sector for a good block of 10 years. And, admin and sales, of a large company. Ended up working, moving from Virginia with that company to St. Louis, and then from St. Louis to New Orleans. And just growing up, I really felt like, by and large, our family was exempt from racism. Like, that was the thought that I had, because I had never seen like blatant racism in my face. And that probably has a lot to do with my parents shielding us from that. But as I got into the corporate sector, things just started materializing more and more, where, it just ignited some action. You can't sit back and let this underlying racism still affect people. Because I was just, in my head, and what we're taught, especially in a place like Virginia Beach, is that racism is calling somebody the N-word. And that was pretty much it. So yeah, that's kind of like a background. I've been in New Orleans now for 10 years, and which I guess made my home.
So much of our experiences, our lived experiences, also shape who we are as people. And my lived experience, whether that was living in Baton Rouge or Georgia or Washington, D.C., all of those experiences that I have now shaped me into wanting to continue to fight for freedom, fight for justice in Louisiana. Keita is my counterpart in New Orleans, and we're on the same trajectory, I guess you could say, as it relates to fighting this fighting for justice and fighting for freedom in Louisiana.
I'm noticing a lot of intersections that you all have to my own personal background, as well as to those that actually, have been interviewed for the Expanding Our Roots interview series. For one, we actually interviewed somebody who grew up in Virginia and who grew up in Virginia Beach specifically.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's an interesting connection. But as with regards to Miss Laquitta, one of my big connections is that I went to McKinley High. Now, I graduated many, many years after Miss Laquitta, but I did go to McKinley High. I'm a Panther. And also, I too lived outside of Baton Rouge. Once I left high school, I went to New Orleans. I went to the University of New Orleans, and I went to graduate school in Vermont and lived in New Hampshire. Having those experiences of moving away really shape you as a person, kind of like what Miss Laquitta was saying. When you move, you see things, you experience new sides of yourself. But I think for Miss Laquitta, this question probably will be more appropriate. But you may be able to answer that, Miss Keita, how it felt to, after having traveled and had these experiences, to move to a place where you are settled. The question that I have for both of you, and any one of you can take a turn in answering it, is whether or not you can talk about your transition going from being all over the country and all over the world to settling here in Southeast Louisiana, and what things you had to do in order to root yourself into this community.
Yeah. Good question, Jahi. So the path that I took to get here was like a very meandering path. I never thought that I would be living in New Orleans or even settling here. When I got the opportunity to move here, it was really, the thought process was, 2 years, I'll give it a go and go to the next place. 10 years later, I'm still here. And purchased a home, like literally putting down some roots here. And I think that transition had come from, a lot of personal experiences I've had since moving to this city, like specifically. And that's a couple defining points or defining moments in my life. New Orleans is a very magical, healing place. And one of the reasons why I feel like I was just not only drawn here, but am pulled here. Like I don't want to say stuck, because I'm not stuck, but just like there's no going off anyplace else right now. But I had some very traumatic experiences living here, trying to start a family, and being of course, I lost a newborn after a very healthy, normal pregnancy. And, that was a moment where, you just kind of, a moment of reckoning of the whys. Why did this happen? And what circumstances would have allowed that to happen in in an otherwise like very healthy, like I had literally just finished a 15-mile obstacle course race. At the very beginning of the pregnancy. Like I just couldn't fathom why, something like that would have happened so close to, term. So, there was a lot of pain in there, and a lot of, going inside of myself. At the same time, my marriage was falling apart. And so that was just another layer of, having to go like really deep diving into like who I want to be and like, why am I here? And, what kind of work would really water my soul and help heal these kind of wounds that have occurred here in New Orleans. I had left a job that I had been with for the better part of my adulthood. It was, I was hired literally right after college. Spent the 10 years like moving around in corporate office and corporate world. They even transferred me down here, but it was an environment that was very, I would say anti-woman. and anti-Black. And being here was very telling, working in this company, about how bad it was. Because, you know, working in the corporate office, it was more hidden, but just kind of working in these offices, just, you know, the lack of promotions, the lack of respect that women were given, the lack of promotions into higher level positions, it just got really trying. And so at that point, you know, through all these things that were happening in my life, I just up and quit. I gave them a week. And I just had to get out of there. I went home, home to Virginia for a couple months. I took my savings and just rested. I didn't work. But during that time, I was actually, all this stuff was happening. I was still getting a master's degree online, because I knew I wanted to switch directions in my career anyway. I wanted to work in a nonprofit setting. I wanted to work helping people. I wanted to do the type of work that liberated people. And I wanted to have some kind of foundational knowledge to do that. So I got a master's in human services with a concentration in community service. And so that helped pivot me into my first nonprofit job, which was an AmeriCorps position. But I think it was very transitional and just kind of setting me up in where I wanted to be positioned and the type of work that we're doing now, and just kind of allowing myself to put to be in situations where I can learn specifically about all the different disparities and why, and actually where I learned, you know, one of the most important pieces that really made me connect, which is the health disparities that Black women face with infant mortality rates and death of mothers after delivery. And so there was some data that really shocked me, that really jarred me. And it was like a little piece of the why that was finally answered. You know, not the whole reason, but, you know, a little piece of something that I could hold on to and say, oh, you know what, this is not how it should be. And educated Black woman with little health problems and still have a greater chance of dying after birth or having an infant die after birth than a white woman who only has a high school diploma and who may be living in not as affluent. So that's a long-winded answer. So I do apologize. But yeah, there's definitely some key defining moments into why I'm here where I am.
Thanks for that, Keita. You know, Jahi, when I left, I said, you know, I'm never coming back here. I'm done. You know, I think there's greener pastures on the other side, or greener grass, whatever you want to say. So when I left, I said, you know, I'm not coming back here. But since I lived in the area in DC, I would visit every year. My mom and my dad still were living here. I had family here, and family was important. And they were getting older. And I wasn't going to be like a phone call away where I could get in the car and drive immediately. You know, I wanted to be nearer to them and to see them grow old and do whatever I could, because they had sacrificed so much for me. So, you know, it takes a lot of prayer when you decide you want to up and move your roots from somewhere far away to a place that you grew up, to a place that with so much uncertainty on that journey coming back. So when I did decide to come back, you know, I also scoped out the city like I was moving to another town. You know, I went to see, okay, if it has this store or this or that, if it's made some progress in a couple of areas, then yeah, I could see myself living there again. I had to be able to envision, you know, living in this area again. And I knew that I had outgrown some of the people that I had associated with because of my experiences. I wasn't going to have that many friends, but I had my family here. That was important to me. So when I packed up every little thing I had and put it in a car and sold everything else and came back here without a job and lived off my savings for as long as I could until I could find a part-time job. But, you know, at that time, I think we were going into a recession. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? I have a big student loan, you know? So I was like, okay, I can do this. But oh, how I long for those days where I could go back to something familiar. And I tell you, a couple of times I wanted to pack up my car and move back to something familiar. But my heart was here with my family. And so I stayed. And here I am now, 10 years later, still, however, have wanderlusts. I'd still love to go somewhere, but the need here is great in terms of the work that the Foundation for Louisiana does as it relates to inequities, racial justice, economic justice. We're doing that work. We're not alone, but we're partnering with folks in the community to help to move the needle on those issues. So that's why I'm here. Everything has an appointed time, an appointed season. This is my assignment for now. Who knows what it will be in another year or two. So that's why I'm here.
Well, I want to thank y'all so much for being so open and honest about the things that you all went through and the challenges you all experienced being here in South Louisiana. I know it's not easy to make an adjustment. And from what I hear, you all went through a lot of growth and a lot of trial and tribulation within yourselves. But it's very obvious that your presence here is very much needed because the work of the foundation is very important to South Louisiana. I don't know of a lot of foundations in Louisiana that are socially conscious driven and are focused on social equity and social justice. A lot of foundations, not to, bad talk anybody, but a lot of foundations tend to avoid social equity in a radical sense. That being said, I want to, just for the sake of people who may be watching this and may be unaware of the work that you all do, give you all an opportunity to talk about the work of Foundation for Louisiana and how the foundation differs from maybe other foundations who are pretty well known in the community, both in Baton Rouge, where I am, and where I think Miss Laquitta is, and also maybe in New Orleans for Miss Keita, and just the kind of work that you've been able to do during this pandemic. So it's a multi-layered question.
Let me just tell you who the Foundation for Louisiana is. We're a social justice intermediary foundation. When we say intermediary, that means that we give money and we receive money to do certain types of work. The Foundation for Louisiana started in 2005 as the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation. Right after Hurricane Katrina, there was a large inpouring of funding to help to rebuild New Orleans. And so we've always looked to the communities for their wisdom to help to shape and to solve and bring solutions to the problems that they want to address. So building relationships with communities are important in our work. No matter where across the state we do that. However, we've been mostly focused in Southeast Louisiana, but we do have some statewide presence as well. So Foundation for Louisiana, as we continue this work across the state, we understand that it's more important than ever, given what we've just experienced in the last week, or the last 4 years, actually. And so we are building, we are resetting, and we are building the work to bring in more folks from the community to help to shape those solutions that impact communities of color. We also have an aspect of our work called the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And I'm gonna pivot now, and Keita will explain that piece of the work that we're doing.
The foundation, upon its founding, had always been founded on this idea of equity, and it was really on this idea of an equitable recovery of Louisiana after Katrina, and kind of where the role as an intermediary really took charge, getting the funds and dollars from big national funders and being able to get it to the ground to smaller organizations that may not have been able to apply for such funding, or there's just so much happening that the foundation was able to step into that role and ensure in a lot of cases that whatever was happening in Louisiana was going to be equitable for everyone. And it just really grew and pivoted to this idea of racial equity once the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation framework was introduced to the foundation. And so that has been built by leaders and scholars all across the nation, and some of our very own New Orleans own leaders in the community who really help shape what that framework is. And it's a way to sort of introduce the idea that, or dispel the idea of this hierarchy of human value, which we in the TRHT and the folks that have implemented this in their communities is trying to dispel, this is a myth, this sense of hierarchy, racial hierarchy is untrue. So the purpose of the TRHT framework is to change the narrative of who we are, who people are, dispel, use actual lived experiences to tell stories and to build relationships among people and groups. But it also entails a framework that was structured around this idea. And that framework includes different pillars where the communities that were able to implement this framework can just target into whatever those pillars might be, which is law, which can range from anything from the criminal justice, reform, reentry, immigrants' rights, separation, which has a lot to do, think of housing and think of what's happened over the course of the century when it comes to redlining and how Black families have been kept outside of living that freedom of home ownership. And then also the last one is oh gosh, help me out, Laquitta. We have law, separation, and economy. I'm sorry, thank you. And just really building out how to, allow folks to take part in the economy in real ways, in a different way, not from the same capitalistic point of view, and how to include small businesses, how to include Black-led businesses, how to include women businesses, and just kind of build a better, equitable structure around that. Overarching all of this is this idea of racial healing, and that is the concept of dealing with, acknowledging the past harms that have happened, but also moving through the harm and through the trauma with people, with folks who are not ourselves, who are across the aisle, and really build relationships to really start healing our communities from the wounds that have occurred through centuries of white supremacy and this false sense of hierarchy of human value. Feel free to add to that, Laquitta.
No, the framework, there are 13 other sites involved in this particular effort across the nation. And we also have a day, it's called the National Day of Racial Healing, which will take place next Tuesday, January 19th, where we'll have conversations, and there are other activities planned across the nation to bring people into this conversation about racial healing or about racial equity, about racial justice. So folks, go to our Instagram site or our Facebook, and you can get the information about where you can tune in for the National Day of Racial Healing. It's a discussion about, what is it going to take to get us to that point where we can respect all people, where we can value all people. And so that's a conversation. That's an ongoing conversation that's been happening. And it's a difficult conversation, but we're willing to have that conversation, not just in Baton Rouge, but in New Orleans and in these other 13 sites that were selected to participate in this particular endeavor.
First of all, I want to just say that I deeply admire your work. And now that I have had a chance to hear more about the Foundation for Louisiana for itself, I definitely appreciate the type of work you do. And I am so excited to see how the endeavor and your collaboration with the Kellogg Foundation will turn out and manifest throughout this year. I wanted to ask you all a question related to this concept of healing, because lately we've been hearing the word healing a lot. Healing in terms of racism, healing in terms of the actions of this past outgoing Trump administration, healing in terms of democracy. And it seems as though healing has different definitions depending on who you talk to. With some, healing may require us to avoid reopening old wounds, to avoid creating division and fostering animosity. And for some, healing may require accountability and holding people accountable and more of a justice-oriented form of healing. But how would you all define healing, specifically for yourselves? And also, maybe if you can, how does the Foundation for Louisiana itself also see this concept of healing?
For myself, I see the concept of healing. Healing is not a destination. So I've come to accept that there is not this place that I will get to that has a stamp on it and a sign that says, welcome, you are healed. And it is a process, and it's continuously moving. On an individual level, it's continuously moving. It continuously involves you doing some work, the individual doing some work, because that's the only way to have some kind of transformation out of the pain. Carol Babel, former executive director of Ashe Cultural Arts Center, helped us to remember that, what the work that we're doing, what we're trying to do is transform pain into power. And so that in itself, it wraps up for me like what healing is. Collectively, I feel that as a society, healing means unpacking the ugliness, confronting the sins, confronting the mistruths, and bringing them to light, and changing narratives that say that certain groups of people are less than, or certain groups of people are more violent than, or certain groups of people are less worthy of certain things. But as a foundation, so we have been writing and rewriting and thinking and rethinking as to what healing means for the organization. And so we've kicked around a couple of different definitions, a lot of it which that was helped crafted by the groups that we've been convening under the TRHT umbrella, mainly our Racial Healing Community of Practice. And we've come up with a definition of racial healing that's not necessarily adopted yet, but is still being worked on. But we see it as a process that acknowledges, heals, transforms, and restoratively repairs the ongoing wounds from history and the presence of racism and injustice.
I think Keita said so much there in both her interpretations of what healing is. For me, healing is not a body experience. It's all the things that have, all of your lived experience combined that can bring you to this point in your life to say, it's okay, that you forgive, that you can move on to that next place in your life. Although we do have to acknowledge the harms that have happened, I believe we do have to open those old wounds and have those conversations about what has transpired, and that people do have to take ownership and be held accountable for what has happened. And some people say, no, that was somebody else. No, that was you just yesterday that you did something. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important, for healing in so many ways is not just about a physical condition, but also a heart condition. Because whenever we talk in our groups about healing, we always talk about the heart and the mind, and that needs to be changed in order for healing to take place for people. So that's why, one of our colleagues, one of our grantees, Maxine Crump, I think she's been a part of your series, was a grantee of ours, and we understand that conversations are important to have. And she's doing that, and we've been a part of that work. So we appreciate Maxine Crump for her work. And Keita's given you, we're still refining what racial healing is. We want to take this across the state and be able to understand, what does racial healing mean to you? And you can come to our social media page and you can tell us that during this next couple of days or so, or whenever, and we'll post that, because we want to hear from people about, what does racial healing look like to you, not just as an individual, but also, what would that look like in Louisiana? If I ask you that, Jahi, could you answer me? Could you give me an answer about what racial healing looks like to you in Louisiana? You'd have to really think about that. You'd have to put thought into that. And so we're trying to be very thoughtful and deliberate when we formulate this definition about what racial healing is.
Yeah, healing is a very complicated thing to unpack because it's a very abstract word. It's like you can see healing when you experience it, but it's not like rain or lights or a plane or a car where you can tangibly see healing. So healing means so many different things to so many different people. But I think that the goal in order to fight for racial justice more holistically is to make sure that even if people have different definitions of healing, that journey, which is the journey that Ms. Keita talked about, that journey is uniform. So even with our differences in understanding healing, we all want to go on that journey regardless. And I think that that's probably the main goal of the work that we all do. Foundation for Louisiana, you all mentioned Maxine Crump, Dialogue on Race, and also the 821 Project. I have a couple of final questions to ask you all. For one, I wanted to ask, what's next? Because I know with the pandemic, it's a bit difficult to try and envision future steps because it seems like time is so elusive and so undefinable during this time where it feels like all the days are just running into each other. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is another side of this pandemic. And even in the midst of this pandemic, life is still going on and we're still pushing forward. So what are some things that, the Foundation for Louisiana is hoping to do in the future, whether it be this year and beyond?
Foundation for Louisiana during the pandemic has given us an opportunity to really reflect on who we are and where we want to go. So right now, as we speak, that's what we're doing. We're thinking about that. We're shaping our strategy. And we'll talk a little bit more about the racial justice program, because we do have the climate justice program as part of the foundation as well. And we also have arts and culture as part of the foundation's work as well. But the Foundation for Louisiana, we're trying to be very thoughtful and deliberate about what our next steps are, because what has happened over the last 4 years is also in part shaping what we do moving forward. We know that racial justice is going to be a part of our work. We know also that healing justice, which is probably a new concept or a new construct that we're going to be introducing, is going to be a part of our work. We also understand that climate justice is also going to be a part of our work. Environmental justice is also going to be a part of our work. So we are thinking about all those things, but we're also thinking about being more intentional and strategic in how we roll out our programs to focus on Black, Indigenous people of color across the state. We're looking for allies, but our primary focus is on Black, Indigenous people of color.
And I would add also just, moving forward, like we're really trying to cultivate internally a culture of this collective care and radical self-love. And then when we can embody that in ourselves, we encourage our grantees and partners in our programming to embody that. And so I guess it's this concept of healing the healer first, healing the healer while healing others. And we don't want to forget or move away from this concept of radical self-love that we have embarked on. Really, that has it's a product of the pandemic, and a product of having been quarantined and having lockdown and being with yourself a lot of the time, where you have the time to just kind of decompress and go through all the emotions that you have to go through, but also learning ways to experience joy, experience rest, and experience ways to take part in life, in addition to this hard work of undoing racism and improving and getting democracy to the place where we've always envisioned it should be, but never really got there.
I always feel like it's important to constantly evolve and grow. And I really appreciate the response that you all gave. Like, you all are still trying to focus on work and continue working. And honestly, I'm in the same position with 821. I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years, close to 5 years, basically 4. But I still feel as though if I want to be better than I was in 2016 and in 2020, then I still have to evolve and make sure that even in the midst of our evolution, there's no devolution as well. Because sometimes you may kind of, as the kids say, you don't glow up, you glow down. And you think you're glowing up, but you're actually glowing down. So you may be glowing up on the outside and glowing down on the inside. So yeah, so that's kind of how I would describe it. And another question I want to ask to kind of wrap up is focused on you as individuals, because when we started the interview and we're kind of coming full circle, you all had a journey to the Foundation for Louisiana, and you all just being Black women, being women who have traveled and had these experiences, you all have your own unique journey. So what is next for you all as people in your own journey, as people who are invested in social justice, invested in the communities that you've made a home in, and also just invested in your own well-being, especially as we are just now entering day 11 of a new year? with all the stuff that's been going on in 2021 so far?
Today we had a meeting with our team to help us to process what had transpired last week. And so I think that's where I am in my journey, is continuously processing what is happening and understanding how I fit in and what's my role and what should I be doing at this time. Certainly, so is to ensure that I am taking care of myself. That is a big piece of what we're trying to incorporate in our organizational culture, is taking care of ourselves, because you can get burnt out. So we want to rest, we want to reflect, and we want to continue to do the work in an excellent way. As our boss, Jose Daniels, he likes to talk about excellence in what we do. And as we move forward to this next phase of our racial justice program, we want to ensure that we are bringing alongside us our communities, because this is where the work is so critical on the ground with the folks. So I'm trying to take care of myself, Jahi, so I don't get burned out. And whichever way I can do that, whether that's singing or reading or taking walks or whatever, that is my primary focus, is ensuring that I am taking care of myself and having this balance in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm overwhelmed with what is transpiring.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. I think I would have to say, like, a pivotal point was the 2016 election. I wasn't working for the foundation at the time, but I tell you what, when that opening came out and they were talking about truth, racial healing, and transformation, I was on it. Because that is the work. That is the work that I saw myself doing when I sat there the day after the election with the team of folks that I was working with, and decompressed, or I don't know what we were doing, but it was a moment where we felt very vulnerable and scared and didn't know what will happen in the future. And so that was, I was actively seeking out ways in which I can insert myself into, like, really moving forward this idea of anti-racism. Like, what work can I do personally to help with that? And so I started working at the foundation that very next fall. And so, but for me, what's next is continuing on that healing journey, and, like, really kind of entering into a new space of not waiting to experience the things I want to experience. Not waiting to go on that trip, or not waiting to buy that new car, just kind of enjoying what I have right now rather than waiting for when things are better, because the work is going to be long and hard. And if I wait, I might not be able to experience those things. But also for me personally, challenging the idea of freedom, which is a discussion that we've been having at work too. Like, what is freedom, and what is this idea of freedom that has actually been rooted in white supremacy and is very individualistic and has been harmful, actually. So, how am I reimagining what freedom looks like for me and my family and my community, and how can we, in essence, decolonize that term and really make it true for all people, not just the folks who want to do what they want with what they have and dominate. So yeah, that's my journey. Continuing to learn, continuing to be in forums like this where I can express what it is that we're moving towards. So yeah, more stuff like this.
There are two things that you all mentioned that I really resonated with. I think one was this idea of nurturing ourselves, and the other one was this idea of nurturing our community. And I think that nurturing is probably the most important summation of all the different things that you all have said, because it's easy to get burned out when you're looking at the world. I mean, just to reiterate, 821 is a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse or critique candidates or parties. We simply just, attack the issues that we are facing. But on a personal level, it was disappointing to kind of see the different things that have transpired over the last couple of years, and especially what happened last week. So in order for us to truly be energized to do this work, we have to be conscious of the things that are draining our energy. Not to say we should tune the world out, because we can't serve a community that we are disconnected to locally, nationally, or globally, but we also have to be willing to understand, okay, a lot of this is taking a lot of energy from me. What is restoring that energy? So kind of like when you're on a road trip, you don't just drive the car without any thought of gas. You eventually have to get gas. And you have to make sure that the station you get gas in is not some, station in the middle of nowhere in the desert. It looks kind of sketchy. You want to go to a nice truck stop where you can get a bath, go to the bathroom, get some good snacks, all that good stuff. So we also not only need to be nurtured, but we have to make sure what's nurturing us is good for us. And so I think that as far as ourselves, self-care is very important when you're doing justice work, but also making sure the community you live in is nurturing is very important, because a lot of times there's a lot of people who speak more than they do. So a lot of people will think their words are action, but their actions have to be more than just words. So if you truly support the work that activists and justice workers do, make sure that they themselves feel whole and appreciated and affirmed. Otherwise, it'll feel like they're just doing work for nothing. I have had that personal experience myself, and it's not a great feeling. There have been times where I almost quit the work I was doing because I felt like I wasn't being nurtured. So I had to take a step back and relax and breathe and redirect my focus, then come back to my work. And then I was stronger and in a much more solid position. But I think about how much more support I've been able to get over the years by simply telling people, look, I'm tired. Look, I feel alone doing this. Look, I feel drained. And by being more transparent about those different things, that within itself builds community, because through truth, there is light. And through light, you get to reveal all the different things that you need to move forward for yourself and you need to heal, both in terms of a societal healing and a personal healing.
Yeah.
Now,
you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yes, I agree. Now, one final question, because y'all have had lots of jobs and y'all have probably done lots of interviews, conducted and been in them. And we all have that feeling of leaving an interview and you're like, man, I should have said this. Man, I should have said that. So I always ask this question at the end of every interview that we do for Expanding Our Roots. What is something that you'd like to say or express that you have not had a chance to express during the course of this interview? This could be in relation to the work you all are doing with the foundation. This could be in relation to yourselves, but I want to make sure you all have an opportunity to express everything that you are able to express before we conclude this conversation.
I would like to add one thing, and what you had said just a moment ago really triggered this thought about being able to do the work, but having to recharge and re-energize and rejuvenate, which is something that we've been telling our partners. Like I just started telling our partners, like, take this time, especially during this holiday, when a lot of folks are closed down, to just rejuvenate. You don't have to check your email for me. You don't have to do anything for me. And, just really build this culture of, things can wait and you take care of yourself. But one of the things that we are actually moving towards that you kind of touched upon is helping organizations provide their people, with ways in which to rest and rejuvenate. And how do we support movements? How do we support those in the movements to be able to do that? And it could look like any number of things, and we're open to ideas of how to do that as an element of healing justice.
And I want to say, with gratitude to our two advisory committees that are connected to the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation work in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, it couldn't be made possible without those folks willing to come beside us and help us to define what this work could look like in Baton Rouge and in New Orleans. And I also want to say thank you, Jahi. I remember meeting you in a store, and I was like, yeah, I'd like to talk to you more about your work. And you did come and meet with us about your work, and hopefully there'll be other opportunities this year, certainly, that we can work together. We appreciate your series, and it is quite informative. And so we thank you for having us on today.
And I thank you all so much for accepting the invitation. I mean, I know that it's a busy time, it's a very nervous time, and it's a very trying time. So a lot of people are just trying to get through it. So having anyone who's like, yes, I would like to tell my story, yes, I'd like to have the conversation, is great. And also, for the first time, having two people for one time, I think it was just double the fun, because it was both all were remarkable. It was great to hear your stories, especially the most vulnerable stories and the most empowering of stories. And it was also great to hear the work that you all are doing. And I would definitely love to be involved with you all personally, and also with my organization in the future, especially in 2021, since the year literally just started, and working with you all. It would be a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. And I'm so, again, grateful to, to be on your series as well.
I'm grateful to even be doing this series. I mean, you are on my 25th episode. I've done 24 episodes, quote unquote. And when I first started the series, I did not think that I would be able to get this many under my belt. And there came a point where I went from thinking, okay, maybe I'll get one person, let's see, to having like 3 interviews in the same day. So yeah. I'm very blessed to be able to do this kind of work and to have a series that people not only want to watch, but also want to be a part of. It's the pleasure is mine, and it is definitely something I'm very grateful for.